what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, November 15th, 2017, middle of the week, middle of the month. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today here. Our 100-313. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A reminder that today in our third hour, we're going to have Hal Shurtleff. He is the founder and operates Camp Constitution, which is a yearly get-together for young people to learn about the Constitution. We're going to be talking about Agenda 21 and Common Core, and the Constitution, and all this other really good stuff. Number 3. Tomorrow we're going to have Alan Parks, who cured his own cancer with cannabis oil. And, of course, Friday, the lovely lady Claire will be joining us back on the airwaves with her unique perspective on the world. So let's get on into it. A lot of fallout still happening from Jeff Sessions' testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, and a lot of it has to do with his flip-flopping on statements he made before under oath and now has changed them again under oath, and he insists he's not lying, just has a really, really bad memory, which I think would be reason for him to step down. But even going all the way back to the Watergate hearings, I don't remember. I have no idea. I have no recollection of that. I'm sorry. My brain is just faulty here. And one of them, of course, has to do with Sessions' meeting with Papadopoulos that he denied had ever happened, and then it turned out it did happen. Another thing that a lot of people are really kind of wondering about is Sessions defended Loretta Lynch's use of a pseudonym on official emails, her government email account, where she was sending out emails that were signed with a fake name. And Sessions basically said that he does the same thing, so it's no big deal. We all do it, and there's nothing really nefarious about it. Well, if it's official mail, why aren't you using your official name on it? And so it's basically this whole idea about we're just going to do what we're going to do, and because we're all doing it, it's okay. But more and more people are saying it is time for Sessions to go, because it is becoming obvious to everybody that Sessions' Department of Justice launched the Mueller investigation into Donald Trump, where there was no evidence that any crimes had taken place, but is still delaying, blocking a uranium-1 probe where there's paperwork all over the place saying this stuff happened. And so all this talk about Russia collusion, Mueller hasn't found anything yet. Just a lot of rumor and innuendo. The real collusion was between Hillary Clinton and Russia in this uranium-1 deal. And Sessions is still out there saying, well, there's not enough evidence. Well, you had zero evidence to go after Trump, Mr. Sessions. Didn't stop you there, did you? So a lot of people are really getting very upset about this. Little flashback here. Remember during the FBI probe into Hillary Clinton's email server, 5 of her aides received immunity deals. Now, if nobody's done anything wrong, there's no need for an immunity deal. So we know something is there, and we know the FBI has the evidence on it, or they wouldn't have had to strike immunity deals. And still Sessions is saying, nope, we're not going to go look there. Nope. Nothing to see here, people. Move along. And article coming out of the Gateway Pundit is asking, are the delays in prosecuting Mueller, Hillary, and Podesta by Attorney General Sessions the greatest legal travesty in U.S. history? And I think probably I would say yes. Because it's very obvious that the Attorney General and the FBI, the second in a row for both, are protecting Hillary Clinton, which is to say they're protecting the narcocracy. They're protecting a scandal that is so horrific it would, in fact, be the end of the U.S. government were it to come on out fully. All right, let's see. We're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Hey, Mike, I just watched Trump's press conference.
Yes.
And he said America's back. Does anybody believe it? I think he left off up against the wall.
Well, I was watching it too. I mean, there was a big run-up. He's going to make this huge announcement and everything. And basically, I think he's trying to basically cover the fact that he came back from his Asia trip without a whole, and so he's up there making a speech to make it sound like he laid down the law that there will be, sea lane right of way and airline right of way and all the, which was already the trip. So it looks like Trump knows that he kind of struck out over there in Asia, and he's trying to convince the American people that he's accomplished something. But I don't think he really did, and I don't think people are going to buy it from this speech.
Hey, Mike, I got a stupid thing on TPP. I didn't agree with it, but do you think this is what they needed to prop up this global Ponzi scheme, is the TPP, to continue the scam without it? We got nothing to offer, Mike. I mean,
that's
you know what I mean? Like,
I mean, you're exactly right. When they were doing the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, it appeared to be an attempt to literally lock the world's economy where it is right now before it deteriorated the United States. And now that Trump has pulled out of the TPP, the other nation trade agreement are going back in and they're re-engineering it to basically serve their own nation's best interest. And I'll tell you one thing I'm pretty sure is going to go is that demand that there be no labeling of GMO foods or even allow non-GMO to be. I think that one's going to go because many of those countries are already banning GMO or they mandate GMO labeling like Japan. So I think that's probably going to go.
Yeah, people don't realize China's got a 7% GDP. I mean, their growth 7% every year. We had one quarter that was 3%, but that's from the federal government. So take that with a grain of salt. Probably more like 1%. There's no way we're back or we're ever going to be back. We're not growing. We're declining.
Yeah, we are. There's no question about it. We're not back. We're a long way away from being back. It took decades to take the United States as it was at its peak and bring it to where it is right now. And it's not going to go back overnight. It'll take decades to rebuild the United States to where it's great again. And personally, I don't think we're going to get there because I don't think this economy or this federal government are going to last much longer.
And Mike, I just read Journal with that Gary Cohn, that's Trump's, his Treasury Secretary?
Yes.
He asked, they asked the question to the audience, how many, with the corporate tax rate, going from, 35 to 20, how many people are going to invest, and only 2 people or 3 out of the whole audience raised their hand. The corporate tax plan is not going to help the consumers, which is the middle class. We consume the most. It's going to help them, the people who wrote the tax plan. It's not bringing jobs back.
No, it isn't.
They're going to take the money and then rebuy their stocks. They're going to up the stock market, the scam stock market, by up buying their stocks back like they've been doing all along. So anybody thinks this corporate tax plan is going to bring American jobs back has a screw loose, because trickle-down economics and all this other crap don't work. The only thing that's trickling down, Mike, is little breadcrumbs here and there from their French fancy bread they've been eating. I mean, how much more? I mean, I'm so aggravated.
Well, I hear you, and I hear it in a lot of the phone calls, and I see it in a lot of the emails I get. People who are reaching that breaking point, and it's turning into a very, very dangerous situation here. But you're absolutely right. The reason this country will never be great again is because while our politicians are talking about making America great, nobody is making the decisions that would reverse the disastrous decline into economic fascism that we have been on these last several decades, because it's doing well for them. They're going to go on voting their own wallets, vote at the expense of everybody else until the system collapses. We're in the final years of the United States of America, if not the final months.
But Mike, a lot of people don't know this, but out of the $1.2 trillion for the tax cut plan, $900 billion go tax cut. $900 billion, which the rest goes to family or whatever, 2-kid things to try to prop up more serfs to do low-wage jobs or something. We got to produce more people, kids. Maybe they're not bringing enough refugees in, But, I mean, $900 billion of the 1.2 goes to the corporate cut. which they're going to buy their own stock back. So they're not investing here. Apple has they're worth like a quadrillion-dollar company.
Yes.
They got hundreds of billions of dollars, Mike, sitting in cash offshore. They don't pay taxes. And if they have all this money, why aren't they bringing it back, investing already in Americans? Because they're not gonna. I hate to tell this to people. Trump chumped us. Thanks, Mike.
Well, Trump didn't create this mess. It was created for him. Let's be fair about that. The problem that we have here right now is that companies are very reluctant to be investing in manufacturing here in the United States of America because they know the consumer class doesn't have money to buy the products. And so their rationale is they're going to build the factories in the countries where they buy those products, both because it's going to be lower cost to manufacture in those countries and it'll be cheaper shipping the product from the factory to the stores. It's going to be a much shorter distance. So the U.S. is basically, it's dried up, it's used up. And reviving it would just take a tremendous effort. And nobody seems to want to make a commitment to that. You're absolutely right. This tax bill, again, it's raising taxes on the middle class. It's cutting taxes on the ultra wealthy. It's cutting taxes on corporations. The end result is our national debt is going to go up even faster than it did before, and our consumer economy is going to be even worse because most consumers are less, and they're already running out of money. The problem that we have there. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Everybody's like going crazy over this whole sexual accusation, and it's spun completely out of control, and decent people are having their lives ruined with groundless accusations. And we're literally seeing a return to Code Napoleon. If you're accused of sexual misconduct, the burden is on you to prove that it didn't happen, that you're innocent. Otherwise, it's already over. Even though none of these women who have accused Judge Roy Moore are able to document that anything actually happened, they're treating him like he's guilty. And they're saying it's up to him to prove that it didn't happen. Now, interestingly enough, there was a story that came on out from Stillness in the Storm where Capitol Hill staffers are saying that sexual misconduct by lawmakers is epidemic. And in fact, it is so bad that female staffers are literally being warned not to get into the elevators alone with certain politicians. CNN published a report that more than 50 people who worked on Capitol Hill paint a consistent picture of rampant sexual harassment and misconduct at all the hands of the political elite. So this is something that's been going on all the time. It's just being fanned out now as a political weapon to be used against conservatives. Story coming out of Breitbart is saying that Arianna Huffington had a problem with sexual misconduct over at Huffington Post, and she turned a blind eye to it, rather than cause an upset that might harm her blog, its public image, and its revenues. And, of course, the problem I have with all of this sex scandal stuff that they're using, it's being used to distract us away from Uranium One. It's being used to distract us away from rigging the primary. It's being used to distract us away from the dossier, the dodgy dossier, and because, unfortunately, sex works. Remember when Bill Clinton was under investigation for the Whitewater and all the rest of that, and we all got distracted with Monica Lewinsky and Hummers in the Oval Office and the stained blue dress, and everybody's attention was lured away with that. Remember conditization? Gary Condit, was he having an affair with his squeeze? Did he kill her? And that was being used to distract us away from the fact that the United States government was other countries in early 2001 was going to go to war in Afghanistan. And Earth knew it. It was a total surprise to us when 9/11 happened. So unfortunately, along with attacking political enemies, I think all of this sexual allegation stuff is being used by the corporate media to try and distract us all from the real scandals. Your Uranium One scandal, the rigging of last year's primary and attempted rigging of the general election, and, of course, that bogus dossier and who paid for it, and whether certain figures within the Corp Act paid to promote this story. That's where we need to keep our attention. Now, BuzzFeed has managed to put their foot into it yet again, basically they discovered that there was a transfer of funds to Russian embassies here in the United States of America, accompanied by memos saying the funds were to finance the election campaign of 2016. And BuzzFeed went on out with this, and the corporate media picked it up. Here we've got the proof that Russia was interfering with our 2016 elections. The only problem is the Russian Duma election was also held last year. And Russia was sending money to the embassies to set up voting booths for Russian expatriates who are still citizens of Russia but live in this country so that they could vote in the Russian election. And that is how careless and reckless corporate media is in their desire to just demonize Russia and take us back to the heyday of McCarthyism, and there's a commie under everybody's bed. Story coming out of Russia today is talking about the issue. Were U.S. journalists paid to peddle Russiagate? And apparently Representative Devin Nunes, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, has signed a subpoena to seize the financial records of Fusion GPS. And he wants to get those records all the way down to the final recipients of the money. And basically saying that the way they were handling the funds to pay for the dossier and possibly pay reporters to carry the stories amounts to money laundering. Now, as you know, we are coming up on the Winter Olympics early next year in South Korea. And a lot of people are very nervous about the tensions on the Korean Peninsula. It's a little too late, unfortunately, to change the venue. They've already built everything up, and it's there. But the big issue is, will Russia be allowed to participate in the Winter Olympics because of the doping scandals that supposedly erupted during the last Olympics? Now, of course, Russia is denying that there was any doping going on, and now they're suggesting that this whole doping scandal may have been orchestrated by the CIA in order to keep the Russian athletes out of the games. So the U.S. can go in and then get the gold, so forth and so on here. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Fran in Washington, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, nui nui, Michael. Hey, speaking of Russia, I can no longer download and install Yandex.
Okay.
I think I'm being censored.
Well, I would imagine that probably as people try and abandon Facebook and Google and YouTube and the rest of it, that there are going to be efforts to try and block these new startup companies, these new browsers, so that people can't have an alternative. You're not allowed to have a choice. You will use Facebook with its censorship. You will use Google with its censorship. You will use YouTube with its censorship. Okay, and that may be what's going on. Now, after the show, I'll try and see if I can download it myself. It may just be a local block in your area. But we're seeing more and more overt attempts to basically censor what the American people are able to see and get, and to basically block us from having any alternative means of getting out to the world and seeing what's going on.
Precisely. Anyway, I thought maybe your readers and listeners would like to know that.
Okay, well, like I said, after the show, I'll do a verification on that, and we'll come back tomorrow and report on whether we're able to do that. Yeah, at this point, I feel like they've pushed the panic button there in Washington, D.C., and in the corporate media offices, because the fake news thing isn't working out. The forcing Russia Today to register as a foreign agent under this 1938 law has not harmed their reputation any. And I think we're already past the watershed moment where no matter what the government does, it just makes it look worse in the eyes of the American people in terms of dictatorial control of the flow of information. And so, again, in the age of the Internet, government lies don't last. All right, thanks a lot, Fran. We'll let you go. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Russia, Sergei Lavrov is basically saying that governments are using Russia hysterics to distract voters from their own domestic problems. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Anything doesn't work out, it's all Russia's fault. We've been seeing that with Theresa May. She's becoming very unpopular. There's even talk that her coalition government may fall apart. And what is she out there doing? Oh, it's Russia. Russia is sowing discord. Anybody who doesn't love me and my government, they're obviously a Russian stooge. And, I mean, it's getting to the point of abject silliness. Russia's to blame for everything. Oh, my goodness, we had horrible rain all over the place last night. It must have been Russia. It's got to be Russia. It really is ridiculous. Now, let's get on to this whole thing that's going on over in Alabama and Judge Roy Moore. As of today, the Republican National Committee has cut off all funds for his campaign. And a lot of people are saying, what are you guys doing? You're basically handing Alabama that Senate seat to a Democrat. And why are you doing that? Especially when you consider that, again, none of these allegations have been proven. It's a smear job. Now, inside Alabama itself, their state GOP party is basically threatening retaliation for anybody who deserts Roy Moore, saying that they have to remain united, and anybody who speaks out against Roy Moore will be kicked off the ballot in future elections. So this is turning into a real fight. Now, here is an interesting bit of information. CNN published a photo of the signature in the yearbook of one of the victims as proof that, yes, she had known Roy Moore. Well, a signature in a yearbook doesn't prove sexual assault. The fact that they may have known each other doesn't prove anything. But here's where it gets interesting. The inscription in the yearbook says, "To a sweeter, more beautiful girl I could not say Merry Christmas, love, Roy Moore, DA, 122277 Old Hickory House." Okay? Here's the interesting thing. Everything up to the first name Roy is written in black ink. You can see it in the CNN photo. Everything after that, Moore, DA, 122277 Old Hickory House, is written in blue ink. So what it looks like happened is somebody found an inscription in the yearbook signed by somebody named Roy, and they added Moore to it, not realizing they were writing in a different colored pen. And that makes it very obvious the whole thing is a fraud, because let's face it, when you're writing, you know, in a book, you don't change pens halfway through. I mean, there's no indication the black pen was running out of ink. So it's a setup. And it gets even worse than that. Story that's coming out of San Diego Union Tribune. Apparently, a pastor in Alabama reported that he received a robocall from someone claiming to be a Washington Post reporter offering up to $7,000 to make damaging remarks about the Republican candidate. This is a report coming out of Mobile, Alabama TV station WRH. And the message was left on the voicemail of this pastor from Creola, Alabama. And the TV station ran the audio of the robocall. And the message went along like this. "Hi, this is Bernie Bernstein. I'm a reporter from the Washington Post calling to find out if anyone at this address is a female between the ages of 54 to 57 years old willing to make damaging remarks about candidate Roy Moore for a reward of between $5,000 and $7,000. We will not be fully investigating these claims. However, we will make a written report. I can be reached by email, blah, 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 blah." And the email address left is at the Washington Post. So they're literally out there trying to harvest any women who will say bad things about Roy Moore. And they're offering bribes. I mean, it doesn't get more obvious than that. The National GOP is saying that they will ignore the election in Alabama if Moore wins. Why do they hate Moore so much? Why are they willing to literally give a Senate seat to a Democrat to get rid of this guy? Because he's not part of the narcocracy? He's another outsider? Maybe. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And during this break, I did succeed in our caller was having with it. but it's obviously available, and people can take advantage. Chrome is really angering me because they make a lot of decisions on your behalf, like put things, just ignores it. You have to literally go into developer mode to be able to refresh the page. Firefox is big and clunky. They're coming out with a new one that's going to break most of the extensions. Isn't it kind of a sad commentary on the state of our computer hardware and software that they'll have something that works really well, but they have to update it, they have to improve it, they have to force us to buy new and better things at more money, and as a result, our technology has become very decadent. We'll talk about that more later in the show here. Getting on back to Roy Moore. Rush Limbaugh had an interesting comment about that. Rush's opinion is the attack on Roy Moore is coming from Mitch McConnell as a message to Steve Bannon. And that might be part of what's going on, but I think the ferocity with which they want to get Moore out, I can understand coming from the Democrats. They want that Senate seat. They want to take control of Congress so that they can impeach Donald Trump. But why so many Republicans are stepping on in, including John McCain, suggests that the problem is that Moore is not really one of the insiders. He's not part of the narcocracy. And they see having more of these non-narcocracy politicians as a growing threat, going along with a president who's not part of the narcocracy. We're going to take a phone call here. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Francis, are you there?
Hello, aloha, Michael.
Aloha, aloha.
To you both. Snackball and everything. What can I tell you? Two quick things. One, as far as the Moore Roy Moore situation goes.
Yes.
It sounds like another little shenanigan type distract or whatever. Who knows what's going on? Right, mixed with everything else has been used as a distract information, whatever have you. Blah blah blah. One hand distracts from another scenario. But that's not the main thing I was calling about. I've got a big bone to pick.
Okay.
I am so perturbed, it's not even funny. One, since the so-called EPA is so efficient, so effective, and so far part of the federal government's entourage and so forth, they really need to get in touch with and reprogram what type of fuel is being used in the aircraft that are flying in the skies. In case you're wondering why I say that, it's because I don't care how many feet in distance in the atmosphere the aircraft is flying and so forth, ad nauseum, but they really need to check the formula for the fuel that they're using, that they're creating these obscene, disgusting contrails, as they're called, that are like going from a simple streak in the air to a blurred. Swap it this way. Take a piece of charcoal. You put it on a piece of paper and take your finger and rub over the charcoal, and it just creates a blurred streak in the process.
Okay, well let me cut in on here right now, because it's a misconception that the contrails are coming out of the engine from the fuel. The fuel used in modern aircraft is JP1 kerosene, which is used for safety because it will not explode. It has to be properly mixed with air before it'll burn at all, and it's actually very safe fuel. But what it does produce in its exhaust is a large amount of water vapor. And when the air outside the aircraft is very cold, that water vapor will immediately condense to form clouds. When you're seeing a contrail, you're just seeing a long, skinny cloud. It's exactly the same stuff. It's water vapor.
Well, you can say it's a long, skinny cloud, but believe me, sometime after that, it becomes so distorted it's not even silly. And it's like, it really gets really gross. and disgusting. That's the reason why I said, regardless of what type of specialized kerosene it is, they need to recheck the formulation of that thing because it is just nasty.
Well, the problem is anytime you're going to have a hot exhaust of an aircraft that's got any water vapor in it, it's going to produce contrails. And even back in the days of piston engine aircraft, which were burning gasoline, there was enough water vapor there where they would leave trails behind them. You're not going to get away from it when you're flying at that altitude. When you're flying at a lower altitude, jet planes don't leave those kind of you never see those contrails, at the airport itself. It's only when they achieve that high altitude. And again, it's just water vapor. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the war zones. There's a lot of stuff going on around the world. Over in Zimbabwe, President Mugabe has been deposed. There are tanks all over the capital right now. The Zimbabwean military has taken over control of the country. They're saying it's not a coup, but it walks like a coup, and it quacks like a coup, and it sounds like a coup. They took over the state broadcaster ZBC headquarters, and they're assuring everybody that Mugabe is safe. But what they have done is they took the vice president, Emerson Mnangagwa, that was fired by Mugabe, and they've made him the interim president. And so, yeah, it is a coup d'etat. And Europe and the U.S. are already sending envoys to make deals, with the new government of Zimbabwe, because there's a lot of stuff there people want. Zimbabwe has coal, chromium ore, asbestos, gold, nickel, copper, iron, vanadium, lithium, tin, and the platinum group metals. The main products that Zimbabwe exports includes precious stones, precious metals, tobacco, and these various mineral ores. So there's a rich treasure there for whoever can get on in and make a deal with the new government. But yeah, it is a coup d'etat. Now the question is, this vice president and this head of the army, are they in fact part of an organized regime change on behalf of the United States of America? Because that's the whole reason AFRICOM is there, is to bring those African nations under the control of the U.S. economic system, to deny those resources to Russia and China. That's why Africa is going to be a big, ugly battleground in this coming war. Now, over in Syria, the Syrian army has managed to turn the militants back in northern Hama. There was a counterattack. It's pretty much failed. And part of that may have been the result. 6 Russian long-range bombers, those Tu-22s, and they're actually very pretty aircraft. I know they're there to do bad things, but they're actually very pretty aircraft. But they carried out long-range airstrikes targeting ISIS terrorist positions in an area located close to the recently liberated Syrian city of Abu Kamal in the southeast of the country. And the strikes destroyed Islamic State hideouts and military equipment in the area. And the bombers took off from an airfield in Russia and flew over Iran and Iraq to carry out the strikes. So those planes have got legs here. Now, Syrian representative at the UN, Bashar Jafari, while speaking to the General Assembly in New York, stated that Saudi Arabia and its allies have collapsed in Syria due to the heroism and steadfastness of the Syrian nation. And Jafari also marked that the draft resolution, which was proposed by the United States, contained fabricated information and data about the current situation in Syria. Oh, my stars and garters. You mean the U.S. government's been caught lying again? It's amazing here. Now, interestingly enough, remember the Syrian Defense Force? Even though they were Kurdish, they called themselves the Syrian Democratic Forces, rather. And they had a spokesperson, Talal Silo, who defected into territory in Syria held by the Turkish military, and basically made an announcement that the Syrian Democratic Forces will probably collapse within the next couple of months. Okay. Now, we're seeing a lot of talk coming out of Israel, demanding that Syria eject Iranian forces and Hezbollah. And Sergei Lavrov has pointed out that just like Russia, the Iranian Republican Guards, the Iranian forces, and Hezbollah are in Syria with the permission of the Syrian government, something the United States does not have. And Syria is saying it's time for the U.S. to get on out. The U.S. is saying they're going to stay. And Syria is correctly saying that the U.S. presence in Syria, military presence, without the permission of the Syrian government, constitutes an act of aggression. So Netanyahu is now out there saying Israel will act alone to force Iran out of Syria. So now it looks like Israel is going to attack Syria. Syria will counterattack. Israel will say, help, help, we're being attacked by Syria just because we bombed them. How dare they do this? And the U.S. will come in on the side of Israel because they still want to conquer Syria. They don't want to give up. They don't want to be seen as having lost that war. Now, Israel is using U.S. tax dollars for many things, including the abuse of Palestinian children. And children and teenagers are frequent victims of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. They face physical abuse by Israeli military forces, and they're shuffled through this very unfair court system without access to legal counsel or even their families. And the United States has subsidized these abuses with billions of dollars in aid to Israel every year. Now there's a group of Democratic members of Congress who are saying it's gone on long enough. Representative Betty McCollum, Democrat of Minnesota, and 9 co-sponsors on Tuesday introduced legislation that would require the U.S. State Department to certify every year that American military aid is not being used to fund the systematic abuse of Palestinian children. Of course, you know that AIPAC's going to come on out and scream, oh, you're a bunch of anti-Semites and you hate the Jewish people. But the fact is that there are already restrictions on the U.S. aid going to Israel, such as it not be used to fund offensive wars against other countries. But Israel ignores those restrictions, and the U.S. government just turns a blind eye. So this bill may actually be passed, but it won't actually accomplish anything. Now, apparently a group of French and European elected officials had planned to travel to Palestine to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. And Israel's Interior Ministry announced Monday that it was going to bar entry to these 7 officials. And apparently both the EU and France are saying, yeah, okay, that's fine, we'll go along with that. Even though it is a major diplomatic faux pas. So, anyway, a Lebanese newspaper has published an undated letter from Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that puts forward a plan to normalize ties with Israel, despite the risks of a public backlash. Now, as you know, these Muslim countries in the Middle East have never officially recognized the state of Israel because they see it as having been built on land stolen from Palestine. And they have indicated many times in the past that they're willing to recognize the state of Israel as once Israel recognizes the right of Palestine to exist. But Israel doesn't want to do that. Israel wants to be recognized, doesn't want to return the favor. But apparently there's consideration by Crown Prince bin Salman to actually set up official ties with Israel, and there will be a backlash. But apparently Saudi Arabia has decided that teaming up with Israel produces a coalition strong enough to go after Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. Now, Iran is already lambasting Saudi Arabia for asking Israel to attack Lebanon. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has lashed out at Saudi officials, saying that such moves are a shame for the Muslim world. And he basically came on out and said, what position do you think you Saudis are in? Why do you think you have a right to say a party should not be part of another country's government? Basically accused him of thinking that having a lot of money gives them a right to mess with other people's lives. Well, they probably got that idea from George Soros here. Meanwhile, over in Lebanon, the president, Michael Aoun, said that basically nothing justifies the non-return of Prime Minister Hariri, who's been gone for 12 days, and therefore they're considering him a captive of the Saudi government. Now remember Qatar? They kind of got lost in the shuffle there, and all of a sudden Qatar was friends with everybody, and then all of a sudden there was this planted news story. It turned out to be a hoax, but it angered all these other countries, and they basically cut off Qatar and said, you're on your own. Well, so many months further on down here, the Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, in a speech to Qatar's upper house of parliament, said, you know, we're actually a lot better off without these former allies that turned against us. So that actually worked out very well to break free from all of that. Now, over in Yemen, as you know, the Saudis basically imposed a complete blockade, air and sea, and the world shouted their condemnation over the humanitarian crisis that's going on in Yemen. So Saudi Arabia announced that they were going to remove the blockade of the port of Aden. Unfortunately, reports are coming out from the people who actually work at the port saying that ships are still not coming in. They're still being intercepted and interfered with somewhere along the way. And the aid is not getting in, and the starvation and famine and cholera are still going on inside Yemen. Now, here's an interesting little story. This is coming on out of Libya. You remember Libya and the consulate in Benghazi and that whole situation going on in and getting rid of Gaddafi because he was going to have a gold dinar and the rest of it. And it was a victory for private central banking and the petrodollar. But apparently, ever since Gaddafi was taken down, there is literally a slave industry operating inside Libya. They have honest-to-goodness slave auctions. They're operating in warehouses in various cities. And apparently some human beings are being sold for as little as $400 in supposedly U.S.-liberated Libya. CNN actually got on in there and filmed a live auction in progress. So where is Hillary Clinton, the champion that cares about people? Because her actions in Libya created this climate where this rebirth of human slavery could take place. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, the United Nations, which has already come on out with that bogus report saying that Assad gassed his own people, has now passed in the General Assembly a resolution condemning human rights violations by the Russian Federation in Crimea. And again, we're seeing this push toward trying to find some way to take Crimea back and weld it back onto Ukraine and weld all of that back onto the European Union. Now, apparently, one of the commanders of the Ukrainian army, a gentleman by the name of Litvin, in an interview with Apostrophe, said, once we clean Donbass, we will settle the question of Crimea. So already they're talking about an invasion. Now, according to Novorossiya, they're saying Ukrainian forces are already violating the ceasefire on numerous fronts in the Donbass. So it looks like that, along with everywhere else, is heating up again toward a conflict. This thing gets going, it's going to spin out of control. It's already spinning out of control. Ukraine is getting ready to terminate all diplomatic relations with Russia. That's another warning sign as to what's going on over there. And German Federal Intelligence Agency Chief Bruno Kahl is warning Western countries they should be ready to deter the Russian threat. I'm sorry, who's got their weapons on whose country's border? Got all these weapons, NATO, just parked right along the border with Russia. You don't see Russian weapons parked on the northern side of the border with Canada or the southern side of our border with Mexico. You don't see Russian warships tooling around the Gulf of Mexico. We know who the aggressor is. We know who the threat to world peace is, and it's not Russia and it's not Iran. But I guess they're trying to use the big lie technique. We're just going to say Russian threat, Russian threat, Russian threat until everybody says, oh, I guess it must be true. Too many people are saying it. Now, in response to the U.S. government citing a 1938 law to require Russia today to register as a foreign agent, the Russian State Duma passed their own bill saying that all mass media outfits operating inside Russia but funded from abroad must register as foreign agents, a little tit for tat that's going on there. But again, this idea of registering as a foreign agent, why only Russia? Why not Israel, which certainly has done a lot more meddling in our politics than Russia has done? AIPAC, for some reason, is not required to register as a foreign agent, even though it very clearly has a tremendous amount of influence over our government on behalf of a foreign government in Tel Aviv. In the end, it is these hypocrisies, these double standards, where the rules change from situation to situation that undermines the credibility of the government's propaganda. We're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, getting on over to the Western Pacific, speaking at a news conference, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has basically come on out and said that North Korea's current pause in missile tests shouldn't give the appearance that the nation has ceased its weapons development. Well, I don't think anybody assumed that. I think North Korea paused the test to take the fangs out of Donald Trump's mouth and simply say, we're not going to do anything to give you a reason to attack us. But Abe went on say, I believe that North Korea continues to develop its weapons. I would agree with him. And saying it's really too early to initiate talks with Pyongyang. There's no point for talks for the sake of talks. So Abe's turning into a war president or war prime minister in this particular case here. Now, one possible positive outcome of Donald Trump's trip to Asia. China has announced it's going to send a high-level diplomat to North Korea for the first time in 2 years. And the assumption, there's no statement about it, but the assumption is that China will resume pressure on the North Korea, to curb its nuclear arms program. Now, how effective that pressure is going to be, we don't really know. But at least China's going through the motions, or appears to be going through the motions. Let's take a phone call. Terry in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, as far as AIPAC registering as a foreign agent goes, when the Kennedy administration was in, this is what I read, it was American Jewish Congress, I think then.
Yes.
And the State Department, or the Department of Justice, kept writing the American Jewish Congress saying you got to register as a foreign agent. They kept ignoring the letters. Finally, they got one that said you got 72 hours to register as a foreign agent after a year of playing games with them. And then the rumor goes that Ben-Gurion made the statement, we got to get rid of Kennedy. And then, well, that's true or not, I don't know. But 4 weeks later, he was dead. Now, you know, you draw your own conclusions from that.
Well, Israel,
and,
can I insert something here? Israel's thought to have been a participant in the conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy because of Kennedy's absolute refusal to allow Israel to acquire nuclear weapons. Israel was trying to get nuclear weapons all the way back then. Kennedy said, if we allow Israel to get nuclear weapons, it will destabilize the Middle East tremendously. And so he did everything he could to prevent Israel from acquiring the materials, meaning the weapons-grade uranium, to make nuclear bombs. Then when Kennedy was dead and Johnson got on in, the restrictions were taken off. And while it wasn't made public, there was an easing of restrictions, and Israel started getting the materials, including the uranium for the bomb from what was called the Numex scandal, which was a Jewish-owned radioactive material reprocessing plant that had a significant amount of weapons-grade uranium go missing. And it was all explained away as, oh, it just got stuck in the pipe somewhere and nothing to worry about. But the plant eventually closed, and it was basically presumed at that point by the intelligence agencies that they had been siphoning off weapons-grade material to smuggle into Israel.
Yeah, and, you know, American Jewish Congress, you know, I picked up a publication from them saying, it was an old one, and I was just reading it the other day, and it said how opposed they were to South Africa's apartheid. And really, that's pretty minor compared to what goes on in Israel today.
Yeah, it is, but then eventually Israel turned around. They did a lot of business with South Africa. In fact, they even tried to sell them a nuclear weapon. They were co-developing nuclear weapons together, and then at some point along, there were negotiations for South Africa's former government to buy a nuclear weapon from Israel, and the deal fell through. But when the apartheid regime fell, the new government came on in, and they found and they released the paperwork, which tells everybody, yes, Israel has nuclear weapons. They've got so many, they're willing to sell some of them off. And, of course, the question is, who else did Israel approach about buying a nuclear weapon?
Right. And don't we have a law that says if a new country gets a nuclear weapon that we're restricted from doing business with them?
Well, you're talking about the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act, which say that any nations in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuse to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and allow IAEA inspections cannot receive any kind of foreign aid from the United States of America. And obviously, Israel is getting all this foreign aid, huge amounts of money, from the United States taxpayer. And they have the bomb factory under Dimona. They do not allow IAEA inspections, and they will not sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Exactly. Okay, that's my point, Mike. Have a good day. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to James in Tokyo. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I specifically said my name was James T. Kirk from Tokyo.
Ah, that did not come through.
To discipline your communications officer.
Well.
However, you said some disparaging remarks against George Takei. Now,
Yes.
for your information, I sent Sulu on a Federation mission to go back in time to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And when he was pulling that young man's pants down after ingeniously knocking him out with the aid of some Romulan ale, he was only looking for an escaped Tribble. And with all the bad publicity, he did not blame the Russians. No, he blamed the Romulans.
Okay. Yeah, well, small little fuzzy things. I guess you could get confused about that. Anything else?
Everybody's just blaming the Russians.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you mentioned the other day about...
Actually, George did blame the Russians.
A lot of the radiation...
George did blame the Russians.
I know, he did.
He's out there saying Russian...
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah. All right, so Fukushima.
That's why I brought it up. Yeah, you said a lot of it headed out to Hawaii. You know, I have my house my second house, I told you about on the beach. It's about 150 miles away from Fukushima. I've done numerous testing with a SOAKS detector, water, the ocean water, fish, land, my air conditioner, filter, everything. And so far, everything's come out normal.
Well, you may just be in a very lucky place where it's not getting on in there. But I know we don't have really good equipment here. We're able to monitor the air for beta and gamma radiation. We can't monitor for alpha, which is really the main source of contamination. And we're not able to analyze food and water. We don't have the proper laboratory set up for that. But again, this study was done by the University of Hawaii right here in Manoa that said Hawaii has received 200 times the amount of fallout that was expected. Now, they're not saying it's approaching an area where health is going to be compromised, but then we're never really sure if we can trust that because of stories that are coming out of Japan where doctors are being told, just don't talk about the cancers and leukemias, just treat it like this is the new normal, and people have always had this rate of cancer and leukemia.
You know, there are a lot of leukemia, in Fukushima province itself, and about 100% of the kids have thyroid problems. But
boy.
As far as, Tokyo and being 150 miles away, so far, I've just never detected anything so far. And hey, I want to ask you, what do you think about Saudi Arabia? What do you think about Saudi Arabia with them saying that they're going to arrest the collaborators of 9/11?
That story seems to be sourced from a site that had a lot of other stories on it that made me think it's a hoax site. So I don't know that story is real. And again, if Saudi Arabia is working with the U.S. right now, Saudi Arabia would not say that because the new propaganda is that Iran did 9/11.
Yeah, but they did arrest a lot of people, including Aloid, one of the owners, main beneficial owners of Citibank, which is pretty surprising. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all comes down.
Yeah, it is descending into chaos there. Anyway, James T. Kirk, thank you very much for the phone call. You can beam back up to your starship now. We're going to let you go, and thank you for the phone call. Okay. Now then, we're going to do a shout-out now for our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, over in Great Britain, their new Defense Secretary, Gavin Williamson, has vowed that Britain will do everything they can to lessen the massive threat of North Korea. Well, there's only one small thing. North Korea has not indicated any interest in Great Britain, because up until now, Great Britain hasn't been issuing any verbal threats toward them. That may change, of course. Everything North Korea is doing has been in response to indications of aggressions from the West, specifically the United States of America. And North Korea has come on out and flat out said the reason they're pushing as hard as they can on their nuclear weapons and missile programs is having seen what the United States has done in all these other countries that they succeeded in getting to disarm. Because the pattern is the same all over. They got Saddam Hussein to surrender his chemical weapons, then they went in and attacked Iraq. They got Assad to surrender his chemical weapons. They attacked Syria. They got Libya to shut down their presumptive nuclear weapons program. They attacked Libya. So obviously, from North Korea's point of view, they would have to be totally insane to agree to surrender their weapons, because it's going to open the door to an eventual invasion. Now, Steve Bannon is in Tokyo at the 12th Annual Interethnic Interfaith Leadership Conference. And he's out there basically saying that democracies should form an alliance to counter the Chinese threats. So now the saber rattling is spreading from North Korea into China itself. And all I can say is, here's your rifle, Steve, if you really feel that strongly about it. Down in the Philippines, Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau had a very abrupt comeuppance handed him by Philippine President Duterte. And apparently Trudeau was trying to chastise Duterte for carrying out extrajudicial killings in his attempt to rid the country of its crippling drug scourge. Duterte was having none of it and said, I only answer to the Filipino. I will not answer to any other, and then he used an obscene word. And that, of course, is what destroyed the relations between the United States and the Philippines. Obama went on down there and said, don't kill the drug dealers. We love the drug dealers. You're cutting into our action. And then all of a sudden, Philippines are not our friends. They're pivoting toward China. And then Al-Qaeda shows up. ISIS shows up. Oh, the U.S. may have to intervene. But the Philippines succeeded in basically slapping those terrorists down and ridding their country of them. And that's where they are. More and more countries are starting to stand up to all of this outside interference that's coming in from these other countries, whether it's the U.S. or Canada or Great Britain. I think that's a healthy thing. Nations should be sovereign and independent. And no nation has a right to go on into another country and tell them how to run their domestic affairs. Even the United Nations acknowledges that. Trudeau was way out of line. So was Obama. And has it ever troubled Canadians or Americans to see there's so much wrong with our countries, and yet our leaders are constantly gallivanting around the globe, sticking their noses into everybody else's business? If you're really that good, if your suggestions are that good, come on home and fix these countries. Trudeau should focus on what Canada needs. Trump should focus on what America needs. And stop sticking their noses into other countries' business. Well, the House finally passed a $700 billion military spending bill. And they had a few differences with the Senate, but apparently they've worked them all out. They've budgeted $634 billion for core operations and $66 billion in overseas contingency operations. $700 billion. Huge amounts of money, vast sums going into the war machine. Eisenhower tried to warn us. Eisenhower tried to warn us. Now, as you know, Trump went on TV this morning to give a little speech to make it sound like he'd accomplished all kinds of really wonderful things in his Asian trip. But it sounds like he didn't really get what he wanted, and he's trying to convince the American people it was worth the time and travel and everything anyway. But there's an article over in the Real News basically saying that it looks like Trump's trade war with China has fizzled, despite all of his posturing. According to Jeffrey Wasserstrom, President Donald Trump's maiden trip to China was mostly just symbolic. And I'm in agreement with that. Now, do you remember back in 2008, the subprime mortgages led to the blow-up of the mortgage-backed security fraud and a complete meltdown? Well, it's getting ready to happen again. And this time it's with subprime auto loans. Wall Street did not learn any lessons from the 2008 meltdown because they did not have to pay for it. You, the American taxpayer, did. So they're going right back to their games of we're gonna bundle, we're gonna subprime, we're gonna make a lot of money right now, and when it all blows up, the government will make the American people cover the losses. That's the hallmark of economic fascism. Right now, of the $1.2 trillion in auto loans outstanding, 24%, almost one quarter, were granted to borrowers with a subprime credit score, which means below 620. Of all auto loans outstanding, 2.4% are 90-plus days seriously delinquent. This is up from the prior quarter. But the delinquencies, understandably, are concentrated in the subprime segment. Now, the subprime auto lending has attracted specialty lenders such as Santander Consumer USA. They feel they can handle the risks, and they offload some of the risk to investors through subprime auto loan-backed securities. They're bundling again. And, of course, they're charging extraordinarily high interest rates to grant loans to these people. Vulture capitalism at its best. Now, Senator Warren and small business owners are out there looking at the new GOP tax plan and saying, stop pretending this new tax plan helps small business. It doesn't. It's a giveaway to the big corporations and the ultra-wealthy, and it's a tax increase on the middle class. And most small businesses are run by middle-class taxpayers. And it's self-defeating to keep raising taxes on the middle class because it lowers the consumer spending. And even worse, you need to understand that small businesses account for the majority of new job creation in this country. And as small businesses collapse left and right, that worsens the unemployment situation. You can't have this kind of wealth inequality and have a functioning economy. It just will not work. But the money junkies are hopelessly addicted. Congress is in the pocket of the money junkies, and that is basically all you need to understand about what's going on right now. Article out of the Rutherford Institute. Financial tyranny. We the people are the new permanent underclass in America. And that's true for a wide variety of reasons. With the elections being rigged, we no longer have a vote. We're totally disenfranchised. The only thing the government wants from us is money and new soldiers. And that's it. Other than that, they don't care. They're completely unconcerned. They're free of the chains of the voters, except for last year's embarrassment to Hillary. This article, though, is focusing on the very intense problem of skyrocketing medical care costs. Americans can't afford to get sick. People are struggling to stretch their dollars far enough to just pay their ordinary bills, trying to get out of debt. And that if an illness arises, it doesn't bankrupt them. And right now, medical bills are the leading cause of personal bankruptcies in the United States of America. And all the partisan political bickering is not going to change that reality. Because of Obamacare, many Americans can't afford health insurance, drug costs, or hospital bills. They can't afford to pay the rising health care premiums, out-of-pocket deductibles, and prescription drug bills. They can't afford to live, and now they can't afford to get sick. It's just one constant soaking of the American people. And it all goes back to Richard Nixon and his signing of the Health Maintenance Organization Act for his good friends over there at one of the biggest HMOs. Used to be an aluminum company. Kaiser. And that turned medicine from being a service where there were limits on how much gouging could go on into a money-making, profit-centered venture. And it's been that way ever since. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we take this next phone call, one final comment about healthcare costs in this country. The current version of the GOP tax plan does remove the mandate forcing people to buy Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies, which are very expensive, constantly going up by double digits every year. They have sky-high deductibles. It's caused all kinds of problems for all kinds of people. And their rationale for doing that is that if people are allowed to buy less expensive health insurance, they're going to have more money that will free up revenue to be taxed in other ways. So we're now seeing a tug of war for the money between the health insurance industry and its political supporters and other politicians who are saying, well, we need to grab that money back so it can go someplace else. More bombs, bullets, and butter, no doubt. All right, let's take a phone call here, and that's Tom in Indiana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. You just missed a press conference with the for Roy Moore, and you said the other day that was a fake, that whole thing in the yearbook was a fake.
Yes.
Well, the attorney shot big holes in that thing. He said that back when this was supposed to have been written, Roy Moore, it says Roy Moore on the, I'm looking at the yearbook, it has a DA after his signature. He said during that time that he wasn't the DA, he was the assistant DA, and he never signed that way, but he had somebody that worked for him, Schultz, that used to put his initials after his name, on a legal form. Now, he said the lady that presented this never saw him except after that first time, and he presided on her divorce 9 years ago. And on the divorce decree, he signed his name that way, and his secretary put the DA after it. Now, at the press conference, he said that his legal team never had a copy, or had not a copy, but never got to see the actual yearbook to validate how old the ink was. And he says everything they've ever seen was on the internet. And he said, if you look at it real close, the 77s that are on there twice aren't the same. And also, they had a copy of the divorce decree for this woman that had the yearbook, and they passed a copy of his signature with the DA after it, and also a copy of this yearbook to all the reporters there. And it just, to me, it shot holes in the whole argument as far as fabricated evidence, and also the put the onus on the attorney that was representing this lady.
Yes, Gloria Allred.
Now, or to actually be able to have custody of this yearbook so they can have the handwriting expert how old the ink was on this. But to me, it really made a good point. And I'm watching these people talking on TV, and they said, oh, that's not enough. That's not enough. This is not enough. Now, I think on that particular case it was. Now, what really bothers me is I'm a couple months younger than Roy, and I got out of Vietnam in about the same time. And 7 years after I got out of Vietnam, there's no way in hell that I'd want to go out with a 16-year-old girl. I'm going to just tell you that, because I think that's terrible.
Well, let me cut on in here because we're almost out of time to the next commercial break here. For me, again, CNN's picture of that signature in the yearbook shows that everything up to the name Roy was written in black ink, and everything after that, starting with Moore, was written in blue ink. So it looks like somebody found a signature in the yearbook that said Roy, and then they added the rest of it to make it look like it was Roy Moore. And to me, yeah, it's completely blown up. And Gloria Allred, of course, she presents herself as a champion for feminism, and she's had a lot of high-profile cases throughout her career. But there have been some allegations of shenanigans in some of the cases she's worked on before. And I did, in fact, see the press conference it was on during the commercial break. But absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, this is a classic Democratic smear job against Moore, and I'm glad he's fighting back. And we've got to support him, just because it is an injustice. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting into the economic news, Venezuela has signed that $3.2 billion debt restructuring deal with Russia. And basically, this is going to help Venezuela deal with their current outstanding obligations, at least some of which are technically in a state of default, but Venezuela can now call up and say, we got your money. And the details of the restructuring agreement are kind of scarce, but both sides reported that the deal spreads payments out over 10 years with minimal cash service required over the next 6 years. In other words, Russia is giving Venezuela breathing room to try and pull their country and economy back together. So that was a very good thing for Russia to do. It's basically going to help the Venezuelan government maintain order and fend off regime change efforts. And the end result is Venezuela is going to pivot to Russia, because Russia's out there making deals, and all the U.S. knows how to make is war. Now, as I mentioned before, Senate Republicans' tax bill has scrapped the Affordable Care Act's insurance mandate, but we're already hearing that there is a large number of people who are starting to come together and say, oh, no, we have to keep that. And apparently Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are joining members of the Congress and those patriotic millionaires to rally against the GOP tax plan. And you have to wonder, because these are people who are all going to benefit from it. But I'm sure that anybody who is in possession of large blocks of stock for the health insurance corporations, they're going to be in a panic. Because if that mandate goes away, competition returns to the health insurance market. And health insurance companies are going to have to lower premiums and improve service and payouts. And that means their profits are going to go down. And we can't have that. Profits always come before people in the United States of America. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you, Mr. Mike?
I'm doing fine.
All right, the reason why I'm calling, once again, another shooting in this country yesterday, and I don't know about you, I'm just getting tired of waking up to this and this being the normalcy or the normacy bias that's going on in this country. I'm not blaming guns. You know, I'm all for the Second Amendment and everything. But as a people, as a society, what can we do? Is this a mental health issue? I mean, is society degenerating to the point where...
I would say it's a mental health issue. And again, the question I want to know is, was this guy on prescription antidepressants? Because we know there's an issue there, but nobody will touch it because antidepressants make a huge amount of money. And the gun grabbers, you know, the gun grabbers love when these things happen. Some of them are false flags. We still don't know about this one. Was this guy put up to it and told that, you know, he would be put into the witness protection program? They'd fake his death and he's off someplace with a huge amount of money for a nice retirement. We don't really know. There's very few details. Again, there are already allegations that there was more than one shooter yesterday, because there were apparently 7 different shooting scenes, including near to that school. And kind of makes you wonder what were the cops doing if this one guy was going from place to place to place to place, why they couldn't find him in time.
No, I totally agree. I mean, and we know this about with CIA and FBI, you know, with the false flags, what you say. And I'm wondering, you know, a lot of these shootings, San Bernardino, Las Vegas, you know, Columbine, what's the other one, Sandy Hook, all these. You know, I'm not saying if people died or didn't die. That's not what I'm getting at. But what I'm getting at is how these are staged and how they and the optics behind it. Because clearly these things are double barbed. I mean, they have dual purposes for their intent. Yes, for gun grabbing. Pol Pot, Mao, Stalin, Hitler all took the guns. You know, you have a disarmed society. You can then tyranny, you know, can come on in. And I'm afraid that's what we're facing, you know, in our modern world today. Yes, we're armed, but how much longer till that, right or part of the Constitution goes away, as long as our other liberties. I mean, the Second Amendment gives the First Amendment teeth.
Yes.
I just see this plan of. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The Second Amendment is there to hold off abusive government. It's there to basically allow the American people to enforce the other 9 amendments in that Bill of Rights in the face of a government that is slowly but surely trying to whittle them all away. And the last one that they're going after right now, of course, is that Second Amendment. They've already made a lot of encroachments into it. And the idea, of course, is to shift the military advantage to the U.S. government forces and away from the American people, even though the intention of the Second Amendment was that the American people be armed equally with the government to discourage the government from mischief.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's a big debate we have in my politics class, is about the Second Amendment and the Fourth. I'm a very liberal professor, at Hagerstown Community College in Hagerstown, Maryland. I love it. It's fun. It's interesting. I just wish I wasn't subject to the liberal points of view to things. And, listening to your show at Hagerstown Community College, this morning, I was asked to turn it off, listening to yesterday's broadcast because, quote, unquote, it could be offensive and hateful is what I was told.
Well, I imagine that anybody who doesn't agree with me is going to scream, I offend them, or I'm being hateful. But again, you cannot have freedom of speech and an offensive free environment at the same time. And anytime somebody says that, you got to turn it off because it might be offensive, you just say, that's censorship right there. Because if you're going to have freedom of speech...
Well, I just turned it up louder.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. But yeah, if you're going to have freedom of speech, there's going to be somebody who doesn't like what you're saying. I'm sure Hillary Clinton doesn't like a lot of what I've been saying for the last 24 years. And I'm sure she's very angry. And I don't care.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what I'm getting at. As American society, have we the people that called the resistance, if you will, resisting this tyranny, when are we going to stand up and start going to the streets? I'm not calling for violence. That's not what I'm getting at. But we need to start being more and more and more vocal. I don't want to see this thing get violent, but I have a feeling it's going to.
I'm afraid I agree with you. I've been trying to find a peaceful way. I've been sort of following the Gandhi model, if you will. And to me, the indications are that left to itself, that the U.S. federal government is going to follow the Soviet Union into the dustbin of history. But I recognize the possibility that prior to collapse, the U.S. government may try and concoct a reason to declare war on the American people. They're already trying to get us into a civil war with all this Black Lives Matter and Antifa stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it really is, I mean, as far as Hagerstown, Maryland goes, close to where I'm at, I'm right across the border from Maryland into West Virginia. But, they have these things called safe spaces. If somebody gets triggered, you can go and pop bubble wrap for a half an hour. It's like, what? What? I mean,
what
purpose
a bunch
does that
of
serve?
wimps the following generation is. I'm sorry. I mean, that is just absolutely absurd. And, this seems to be the result of liberalism, that you're to be offended by everything, you're to be triggered by everything, you're to whine and cry and scream until the world turns out to be what you imagine it should be. And, again, it's based on this idea that we're all born with blank minds and that we can re-engineer the human psyche by changing the environment around them. And it keeps coming up short because it's all based on an intellectual fraud.
Absolutely. Well, that's all I have for you. Didn't want to waste any more of your time. I'll continue to listen to the show, and you have a great and wonderful day, and don't let things get too bizarre on you.
All right. I'll try my best on that, and thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, HSBC Private Bank, which is a Swiss unit of the overall HSBC, has agreed to pay 300 million euros, that's about $350 million, to avoid going to trial in France for enabling tax fraud. And HSBC was accused of helping French clients to hide at least 1.67 billion euros from the tax authorities. And so they struck this deal under a new procedure that allows companies under suspicion to basically negotiate a fine to keep the case from going forward. And, of course, the deal does not include a guilty plea. Nobody from HSBC is going to go to jail. The people who hid that 1.67 billion euros get to keep it, and HSBC will raise fees on their ordinary customers to cover the cost of the 300 million euro and take part of it off their taxes. It's just another way of siphoning money off of ordinary people and giving it to the money junkies. Now, apparently, the number of people living on the German streets has jumped by a third in the last 2 years. And that is a shock. I remember when I worked in Germany all those years ago, there was no homelessness. I didn't see any homeless people. And now it's a rising problem there, along with everything else that's been brought about by the European Union, like the ECB, the Euro, refugees. Speaking of refugees, here's a good little story. There's a gentleman named Tariq Ramadan, and he is the grandson of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. And he was banned from the U.S. by the Bush administration for his financial support of a charity that funded terrorist groups. But in January 2010, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton overturned that ban and personally approved a visa for this guy. So he's come on into the country, and what was the result of that? Well, Tariq Ramadan is facing multiple accusations of rape and sexual assault of minors. Now, Hillary Clinton's visa for Tariq was seen as part of the new Obama administration policy of embracing more hardcore Islamists. Well, that worked out really good, didn't it, Hillary? You champion for women, you. Over in Poland, they had a massive nationalist rally in the capital, Warsaw, last Saturday. The Polish people for Poland, proud of their nation, proud of their country. And, of course, it drew immediate condemnation from all the globalists around the world. How dare you push nationalism? What's wrong with you? This is the era of the New World Order. There were about 60,000 people in the streets, and to their credit, the Polish government refused to criticize the march. In fact, they called it a beautiful sight. And it was one of the biggest nationalist gatherings in Europe in recent years. This effort to build a single global government has triggered a nationalist backlash all over Europe and even here in the United States of America. And they're trying to fight it back. They're trying to destroy the symbols of our history so we don't have anything to point to say we are a separate, sovereign, independent nation. No, 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 no. You're just a cog in the New World Order. Just accept your place. Now, John McCain was giving a speech to newly commissioned officers at one of the academies. And along with taking a predictable swipe at Donald Trump, he basically, later in the speech, made the demand that these newly commissioned military officers should not put America first and should think about blending with other countries like Europe. Now, McCain said that as a statesman, and he's a long way from being a statesman, Putin's a statesman, McCain said that he concluded that the American example and American leadership are indispensable to securing a peaceful and prosperous future, and there could be no more isolationism, no more tired resignation, no more America first. Well, putting America first is probably the reason that these young men and women decide to sign up for the military in the first place. But apparently the message of patriotism and love for your country are attributes that John McCain has lost somewhere along the way from the days when he claimed he was a war hero. So he's out there pushing that globalist agenda. He's telling America's military, don't think about just the United States. You're a part of the new global empire here. Now, the Anti-Defamation League has awarded Air Force Lieutenant General Jay Silveria their award for actions in standing up to racial slurs, which were sprawled on several black cadets' dorm rooms at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs late last year. Huzzah, huzzah, he stood up to them, and they're going to give him a medal. What they didn't mention was that the hate crime was a hoax, and that one of the African-American cadet victims admitted he drew the racial slurs on his own dorm room and elsewhere. It was a hate crime hoax. But we're going to forget about that, and we're going to, you know, heap all kinds of medals and stuff on this lieutenant general for standing up to hate, which didn't exist in the first place. Over in Sweden, and I'm not joking, this did not come from The Onion. Over in Sweden, they have declared milk to be a racist hate symbol. Represents white supremacy. What if it's chocolate milk? Just a thought. Just a thought. Another story here about political correctness. This one came on out of the Gateway Pundit. Dumb as a brick, and I got a nasty email from the Brick Coalition for this. Chelsea Clinton celebrates the new Sharia law Barbie doll. And Chelsea Clinton, who's supposed to be a feminist and the model of her mother, went to her Twitter account to celebrate the new Barbie that wears a hijab. And, of course, she was immediately trounced on all over Twitter because of the fact that millions of women are abused and oppressed under Sharia law, and that many people in our part of the world view the hijab as a sign of that oppression. And Hillary Clinton thinks it's great. Go ahead, put one on. See, model one for us here. Now, Hungary's foreign ministry has summoned the U.S. envoy David Kostelanik over a plan for the U.S. government to fund rural media outlets in Hungary. And Budapest considers the plan to be a political intervention ahead of an election due early next year. So I guess the idea is it's okay for the United States or Israel to intervene in other countries' political elections. It's only bad when Russia does it. It's only bad when Russia does it, even when they can't prove Russia did it. But it's okay for Israel. Yeah, you know, if you're a loyal, patriotic American, you will welcome that Israeli interference in our domestic affairs here. Now, getting on back to this idea of the church shootings, and they are being exploited for political crimes, and there was a for political ends, rather. There was a very interesting article out of bearingarms.com, and it's talking about how there was a church shooting last month that got almost no media attention, and that was in Antioch, Tennessee. And the reason was because there was an armed churchgoer who put an end to the mass shooting, and the shooter was black and wanted to kill white people. The epitome of a hate crime, but we can't have that in the media. It doesn't suit the narrative. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking about guns and gun rights and shootings. And apparently Joe Biden came out with a very bizarre comment. This goes down to that church shooting in Texas where somebody with a legally owned weapon managed to shoot the gunman and chase him down and basically bring the whole thing to an end. And Biden came on out with the comment that that citizen shouldn't have had the gun in the first place. Those assault weapons have to be banned. Well, shooters tend to get guns anyway. The people who are going to do that, they're not paying attention to the gun laws. But Biden actually thought it would be okay for this Texas church shooter to go to another church, go find another church and shoot that one up, rather than be stopped by a citizen with a gun. And it's almost laughable, because I often make this joke that to the gun grabber, a woman lying raped and strangled dead in an alley is morally superior to that same woman explaining to the police how her attacker got shot. And here we have Biden literally saying functionally the same thing. It would have been better to just let the Texas church shooter go find another church than have a citizen with a gun stop him. And don't forget, Biden was the guy who said that American citizens should only be allowed to buy shotguns for home defense, which is rather absurd, because if a home invader is holding a loved one in front of them as a shield, you can't fire a shotgun. You're going to hit everybody, as opposed to having an AR-15 with a good scope on it where you can put a bullet right into the forehead of the perpetrator. I mean, Biden, to me, probably doesn't know that much about guns to begin with. He's just on board with the gun grab. They're all scared that the American people are getting ready to warm up the tar and pluck the chickens for all the feathers. Now, getting on to science and health issues here, and we're coming up on the top of the hour where our guest is going to be coming on here. Remember the Flint water crisis? Huge amounts of lead in the water, and everybody said, oh, it was terrible, and they're going to try and fix it and make it all better. And then it turned on out, there are problems all across the country with civic water systems that have been allowed to deteriorate to the point where there are dangerous levels of heavy metals in our tap water. And so right now, there's an article that came out of Russia today. Child lead poisoning rates are higher in Detroit and in New York City than Flint, Michigan. This problem has not gone away. They just don't want you to think about it because they can't do anything about it, or they don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to spend the money to revamp all the nation's water systems. And finally, as we head to the top of the hour here, apparently a technician who participated in harvesting organs from aborted babies provided by Planned Parenthood says her company encouraged workers to obtain as many high-value samples as possible with bonuses. They got bonuses for certain baby body parts. That's just sick. And now, of course, as you know, New York Times is saying that the web should censor any pro-life news because it's fake news. Pro-life is fake news now. We're going to be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us on the phone right now is Hal Shurtleff, and he is the founder of Camp Constitution. And Hal, thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, first of all, let's start with Camp Constitution. I just posted a link to your webpage from my webpage, and it looks like it's a great deal of fun and very educational. So tell us all about it.
Well, I think it's a very unique, it's a summer camp program, because we're a lot more than just that. But the summer camp is a week-long camp. It's a family camp. We also have unaccompanied minors and adults who volunteer their services, their time and help, whatever. Next year's camp is going to be based in Western Massachusetts in the Berkshires, and we have quite a lineup of instructors, guest instructors, including Lord Monckton from Great Britain, the leader of the Brexit, one of the leaders of the Brexit movement, and a climate realist, Professor Willie Soon, who's become a really good friend of ours. He comes with his whole family. He's another great, what we call a climate realist. And we're going to have Mrs. Chris Ann Hall from Florida, who's a constitutional scholar, travels around the country teaching people about the Constitution, adults as well as young people. And who else we have? Dr. Duke Pesta from Wisconsin. He's the English professor. He's an expert on exposing Common Core, among other things. And we have some of our own regular instructors, Reverend Stevie Kraft. I teach a class or two, and so we have a great time. We also do a lot of recreational opportunities and historical field trips. We're going to be taking a visit to the site of the Battle of Bennington. At our camp, we teach a lot about our nation's history, stuff that things that you're not going to get in your government-controlled schools. And so, a typical day, we have three classes in the morning, 2 classes in the evening. Recreational opportunities during the afternoon. There's a beautiful lake there. We'll have some optional hikes up Mount Greylock and some historical things right around Greater Pittsfield. The last full day of camp, see, it's not just about teaching people these wonderful principles of liberty and freedom, but also becoming patriot activists, because all the information in the world won't be any good if you don't put it to use. And so we'll take some of the campers out and we'll distribute these subversive things like copies of the U.S. Constitution and maybe topical things, in the communities. And it's really impressive when these adults see young people that really care about our country, handing them copies of the Constitution or things why we should repeal Obamacare or things of that nature we've done over the years. It really resonates well. And the young people, we teach them that they have a lot of influence if they just use it.
Well, that's good that you're motivating them out there. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more places, whether it's schools or near government buildings, where handing out the Constitution is now being treated like a subversive act.
Well, I think you're right. But it's interesting, too. In addition to our doing our summer camp, which is, of course, the foundation, we do year-round outreach events, Tea Party rallies. We even have information tables in public venues. And I live right in Boston, right in behind enemy lines, so to speak. And we will have information tables on Boston Common. What we do is we offer them people a 10-question quiz on the Constitution, and we'll give them free, excuse me, free copies of the Constitution. And we have a great time, but we do learn one thing, that the vast majority of Americans, young, middle-aged, old, know next to nothing about their Constitution. It is gratifying to find an occasional person who actually knows some of these, can answer some of these questions correctly, and can tell us that we're not a democracy, that we're a republic, etc. Well, and so our job is, our goal isn't to make people feel stupid, it's to teach them. And I know that when people teach me things, I appreciate it regardless of their ideological background, and I think we have the same kind of response. So we're not into angry demonstrations and getting in, people's faces and calling them names. That really doesn't have much of an impact. We think we can have more impact in what we do, by educating, and we're aggressive about it. We do testify at state houses, we do homeschool shows, and we do parades, and we're always looking. We also started a little plan to get the Constitution distributed in public libraries, which we're doing here in the greater Boston area. And I'll be heading out to Michigan. I'm sure you got some listeners in Ohio doing some presentations, mainly to homeschool groups, and but some of them will be public venues, and you can go to our Facebook page, Camp Constitution, to learn more about our year-round activities.
Okay, and I'm going to put that Facebook page up at my site just as well. Can you give us an example of just one of the questions that you have in this quiz that you get people?
Oh, sure. The very first question is which amendment protects the right to keep their arms? And we emphasize the word protects. It doesn't give us that right. But then we get down to what branch of government declares war. And I know that's a point with you, of course. Not that I'm in favor of declaring wars, but for the sake of declaring wars. But most people will say the president. And when our founders gave us this Constitution, they knew that war-making ability was an awesome power. In Europe, a king could start a war.
Yes.
And mobilize the whole country, the whole continent. Here you need Congress to declare war. And we have a follow-up question. It's not on the quiz, but when was the last time we declared war? And the answer is 1941, a day after Pearl Harbor, right there in the light. And people are amazed. They say, wow, we didn't know that. Well, how come we've had a Korean War and a Vietnam War and a Gulf War and a Gulf II and this? How come we're deployed all over the world? I said, well, 1945, U.S. Congress passed a law. It was called the UN Participation Act. And when the Security Council of the UN decides to send our soldiers somewhere, we send them. And that's why we don't win wars, and that's why we don't declare wars. And again, we are all over the world, and these are the things we teach at our camp. We actually have a class, and we don't do the same thing every year. We like to have different instructors, but we need to get out of the UN, and we don't just go to the foundations. Actually, we contrast the U.S. Constitution to the UN Charter. You have two diverse, diametrically opposite documents.
Well, I'd like to, if I could cut in here for a second, I'd like to point out we're involved in wars for which there is no UN mandate. I mean, Mattis is out there saying that the U.S. is in Syria at the request of the United Nations. It didn't happen because from the United Nations point of view, first of all, what's going on in Syria is a domestic affair, and the UN isn't supposed to get in there. It's actually not in the... It's in the UN Charter that they don't interfere in internal domestic politics, but there's been no Security Council resolution, and so even that idea of the UN participation, that's not there anymore. We really do live in a country where the war party says we're going to go to war, and everybody says, yeah, we're just going to go along with that, and the American taxpayers are being bled dry, paying for it all. And, of course, we've had so many of our young people come back from these war zones in wheelchairs, on crutches, or in very cheap metal boxes.
That's correct. There's literally dozens of U.S. missions all over the world. And, again, maybe there's, over the course of the last 50 years, there may have been a couple that were justified, most of them not. You're probably familiar with Smedley Butler, the Marine general. He retired because he wrote a little book, War is a Racket. He basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but I think he said that we're basically collection agencies for the big banks, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And that the Panama Canal invasion, the Panama invasion was a typical example You had a dictator there, Noriega, who I guess we were okay with. He wasn't paying off the Marine Midland Bank. He thought he was his own man, and we had to take him out and make sure the banks got their money. So that's a big problem we have. And again, most people just don't know this. We've got two generations of people that think the president can do whatever he wants. They can send people, and it doesn't matter really what party. Both parties have evolved. I know when younger Bush was sending people out to the Gulf, the Democrats are calling, oh, he's a warmonger. I said, really? Well, you might be right, but what did the Democrat Party do? I said, they could have simply asked for a declaration of war. They could have invoked the War Powers Act, which they didn't do, so they're just as guilty. So don't give me this stuff.
Well, look at all the wars that were started, during the Obama administration. Look at what happened in Libya, and then the subsequent attack on the consulate in Benghazi. And the Democrats were fully on board with that. This is one of our wars, therefore it's cool.
Good. Well, just like Kosovo, and when Bill Clinton was in office, he was bombing Belgrade and aspirin factories in Somalia and so forth. But if we followed the Constitution and we demanded that our elected officials followed it, and most people don't even know their congressman or congresswoman, and they'll say, oh, Congress has an approval rating of 6%, except their member. Everybody hates Congress except for their member of Congress, who they don't even know. And that's one of the things we try to bring about. And by the way, your listeners can go to our YouTube channel, it's Camp Constitution, and you'll see our classes, copies of the radio show I do, some of them, also the events we do year-round, and some of the recreational activities, some of the fun things. Although I like to think learning is a very fun thing as well. So it's not just, the recreational things, the campfire, the swimming, the hikes, but also the great classes we have. It's all, I think, all part of the great experience of our camp program.
Well, it sounds really wonderful, and if I may take a slight detour here, as I understand it, you're a fellow New Hampshireman.
Actually, born and raised in Boston.
Yes.
My dad was from New Hampshire, so I do have roots in New Hampshire. In our camp, the first 9 years of our camp, we did it in the town of Rindge, New Hampshire. But next year it will be about an hour and a half to the west and south in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. But I'm very familiar with the state. I get up there a lot. I know a lot of the legislators up there, and I'm on talk radio up there on a somewhat regular basis too.
Well, I was born in Boston, but I spent my childhood in New Hampshire, and I think back on it with a great deal of fondness. And, of course, I remember Boston very well, Boston Common, the Freedom Mile, and so forth and so on. But getting on back to our current events here, my view is that Constitution represents the original contract with America. And I will always tell people that, when you're taking out like a car loan or a cell phone thing, you look at the contract. You read the contract to see what's in there. Shouldn't you do the same thing with the contract between you and the government? And it is amazing how people just say, oh, well, no, it's very different because it's the government. No, it's no different. And my position is that if the government is not in compliance with that contract, if they're not fully in compliance with that Bill of Rights, then it's hard to see it as a legal, legitimate government in the first place. And I know a lot of people get very upset and say, oh, you're talking sedition and revolution. And I'm saying, no, I'm talking about enforcing the terms of the contract. And so people really do need to read that Constitution, and there are free copies available all over the place. It's at my website, and you should read it, and you should really understand it in order to understand just how far away from that original Constitution and the plan for this country our current government has drifted. And we're seeing these ongoing attacks on our Bill of Rights, and that even includes down to Common Core. I heard you mention that earlier, where Common Core is teaching a very, shall we say, mutated, watered-down version of the Bill of Rights to students. Now, we used to have a neighbor who lived next door who was allied with the company that was bringing Common Core to Hawaii, and she didn't know that I had the website or the radio show, and she was sharing some of the curriculum and showing us the very absurd things that are in Common Core. And even she was very upset, and I understand that after she moved away, she left the company because she was a former educator herself, and she just did not like what was going on. But Common Core is trying to raise a generation of young people who are oblivious to the guaranteed rights of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. They're not teaching these kids to think. They're teaching obedience to authority, to simply believe as you're told to believe, or that you can be what you believe you are, like this trans racism now, where people are born white but they want to identify as black or Libyan or something, and it's just muddling up people's heads and basically disconnecting them from the real world, which is where they need to be operating.
You're exactly right. One of the things that we offer is the Sam Blumenfeld archives. On our website, it's free. Sam Blumenfeld was a man who's passed away 2 years ago. He is a pioneer in the homeschool movement, or was, and he understood what was happening as far back as the early 60s. He was an editor for Gross and Dunlop. He edited the Hardy Boy and Nancy Drew books.
Oh, yeah.
And a friend of him said, "Hey, Sam, would you be willing to be part of this reading literacy foundation?" He says, "Why?" He said, "It's the reading, teaching people how to read is the easiest thing in the world. You learn the vowels, the short sounds, and then bingo, within a month, you're a good reader." He says, "Well, you got to read Rudolf Fleischer's book, 1956, Why Johnny Can't Read." So that book changed his life. So he was blowing the whistle on this years ago, and he thought that maybe people, once they realized that the system that they introduced in the government schools, the look-say method, isn't working, they'd realize it was a mistake, and they'd revert back to the intensive phonics. But the more they was exposed, the more the educators stuck to that look-say. Then he concluded that he used the term deliberately dumbing down of America. So what we see isn't just naivete. We're looking at a deliberately dumbed down, and Common Core is sort of the nail on the coffin. So we encourage people. We have a lot of our campers and families are homeschoolers. We do strongly encourage look at that as an alternative. But at the very least, do your best to get your children out of those government schools, because it doesn't look like they can be redeemed anytime soon. And the thing, as bad as they are now, and they're going to get worse. And it doesn't matter whether it's an affluent school in a suburb or inner city. They're really pretty rotten all around the country.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And, you know, there was an interesting little sidebar here in Hawaii, because along with the state schools where they're putting in the Common Core, there's also a private school system called the Kamehameha schools, which were funded out of the will of one of Hawaii's last queens. And the schools were set up specifically for children of Native Hawaiians who were not, at that time, allowed to attend the state schools with the children of the sugar plantation owners and the missionaries and so forth. So the Queen set up this education system, and they're very good schools. They don't do Common Core, and they're, in fact, so good that non-Hawaiian families are trying to get their kids in there, and it resulted in this very bizarre lawsuit where there was a class action lawsuit that wanted to overturn the terms of the Queen's will and say that anybody can go to a Kamehameha school that wants to. And it kind of underscored the fact that the state-provided education is very inadequate in this country, or in this state rather. And a lot of that is deliberate, and it's not a new thing. I mean, a lot of this goes back to Andrew Carnegie, whose educational foundation that he set up basically took the position that ordinary working people should not receive any more education than it took to do their jobs, fill out the paperwork, cash their checks, and go to the banks. And that was it. Anything more than that would just confuse them and trouble them. It's a lot like the plantation thinking during the antebellum South, where the slaves were not allowed to read and write or have any kind of knowledge, because it would just trouble their simple little minds, and they don't need to worry about that. And now we're seeing that same kind of plantation thinking applied to the middle and lower classes of the American public right now.
Well, John Dewey, who was known as the father of so-called progressive education, in 1898, he wrote an essay. And again, I'm paraphrasing. We actually put it back in print, Camp Constitution. And Sam Blumenfeld wrote the foreword to it. And he said that he was discouraging illiterate society. So back in 1898, he was writing about it. So, and they did a great job. They created this look-say method. By the way, the look-say method was how you teach deaf children or deaf people how to read, because they can't hear sounds. It was designed by a minister, Gallaudet, the Gallaudet School for the Deaf. He thought that maybe this system can be used to teach children that have hearing, and I don't think he had any evil intentions. But the so-called progressive educators are the ones that latched onto it. And, between the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation, they funded these experimental schools, the school in New York City, that actually the Rockefeller brothers, David and Nelson and all these, the brothers there actually went to this school. I can't remember the name of the school. And Nelson was functionally illiterate, so it did its job. But so they look at it failed, and we're going to take this failing system. We're going to let the rest of the country adopt it. And it was the Dick and Jane Reader. Some of us remember those.
I remember those as well. We're going to have to take a break for commercials here, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes here, continuing with Hal Shurtleff and Camp Constitution and all these other topics. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're speaking with Hal Shurtleff of Camp Constitution. We're talking about education and Common Core. And the big problem with the see-speak or see-say system of reading is that in ignoring phonics, it transforms words into icons. It's a shape. You see the word, the shape that means tree, you say tree, and that's all well and good, but it makes it much more difficult for the students to learn words that are coming from sources outside the school. The only words they know and can recognize are the ones provided by education, and it's more difficult for them to find, to understand words that are coming from other sources. And this goes all the way back to George Orwell in 1984, the theory behind newspeak. If there isn't a word for a bad thought, then the people will not think those bad thoughts, or those double plus ungood thoughts. And so, yeah, that's another way in which they're hamstringing children and students, and basically saying that the only words you will know are the ones that you are given by the state-controlled schools to understand.
Absolutely right. By the way, I just got an email from one of your listeners who's, I actually know her. She lives just about 40 miles south of me. She's all excited. She wants to come to camp, so I appreciate the help. The remedy to this, even if you're a teenager or an adult, we can relearn through phonics. And my late friend Sam Blumenfeld taught many adults who were functionally illiterate. He even had Down syndrome children that he turned into very literate. And if you go to our website and you'll see the Sam Blumenfeld archive, it's all free. All we need is an email to log into the system. You can download his Alpha Phonics. It's 128 lessons. You can listen to either audio or video, and you can teach people, teach yourself, or teach others how to read phonetically the way our language was intended. You can also teach people or yourself how to do cursive. Cursive is sort of a lost art, and Sam was a stickler, and I agree with him that cursive first, because young children have a cursive reflex. They scribble. So when they come to these public schools or government schools, they take that natural cursive reflex and they use the block or printing. And then they used to teach cursive afterwards, and so you have amalgamation of cursive and block. Now they don't even do cursive. It was interesting. I was visiting a museum in Maine, and the curator said that she had a volunteer from her local high school, and it was a museum of a famous opera singer, her homestead, Lillian Nordica. And she said that she couldn't translate her handwritten notes, to type them out because she didn't know how to read cursive. That's how bad things are. You can't read cursive. And as you know, many of our organic documents are written in cursive, like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. And so it looks like they're really trying to make children be kind of dumb. They can't even read cursive. They can't do basic math. This Common Core math there are math majors, math professors whose children are coming home with these stupid Common Core lessons, and they can't teach. They don't know how to do it. It's bad stuff.
Yeah, it is. I've looked at some of that math stuff, and it's just amazing how complex. It almost reminds me of the Tom Lehrer song "New Math" when they were trying something similar back in I think it was the 70s. But yeah, the idea is to create a grand illusion that our schools are educating our children without really educating them. And for me, the biggest crime of all is that children are not being taught to think, to analyze, to use logic, to ask questions, most importantly, to self-direct their own education. They're just supposed to sit there and be a receptacle for whatever the state decides they're going to pour into their little brains.
they're basically, they're actually a teaching to the test. We will learn enough stuff to pass this dumbed-down test. And that's not what education is supposed to be about. Now, I'm a homeschool dad. My youngest is 13. I have some adult children that I love the idea that they want to learn on their own. We have this concept where you have to learn for something for 40 minutes, the bell rings, you go on to the next subject, and the bell rings, you go on to the next subject. There's nothing wrong with doing math for a whole week. Or, hey, I love history. I want to go visit the Noah Webster House. I'll tell you what, I had to be in Connecticut. Let's take a ride down there. We have that luxury here in New England, in the Northeast. We have great history.
Yes.
Hawaii, you have great history, too, but you probably can't visit the gravesite of one of the signers of the Declaration or the Constitution.
No, unfortunately, we can't here. Now, we're going to have to take another break for commercials. Our commercials are spaced out rather irregularly, so we'll be back in 4 minutes with Hal Shurtleff of Camp Constitution. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And for those of you who want to support Republic Broadcasting, grab your pencil and paper. And I'm going to give you the address again. If you want to send in a donation, it's Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. And if you want to phone in a donation using a credit card or something, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And, of course, donations directly to What Really Happened can be done through the website, and they are needed and greatly appreciated as well. So we're talking with Hal Shurtleff of Camp Constitution. We're talking about Common Core and education, the Sam Blumenfield archives, about needing to teach yourself the phonetic way to read in order to understand words that were not given to you by the state-controlled schools. But at this point, we're seeing a government that is just attempting to exert minuscule control over all of our lives. What medicines we can take, what medicines we can't take, what food we have to eat, what foods we're not allowed to eat. They've even come up with a tracking device on medication, where if you have to take your medication, it will send a signal to a little patch which goes to your smartphone so that the government knows you're taking your pills when you're supposed to be taking your pills. It's right out of Brave New World and Aldous Huxley kind of stuff that's going on here. And so it makes sense that, yes, Common Core and the educational system are designed to give the government control over just what our children know and, more importantly, what they do not know. It's interesting you were talking about the awareness of history one has living and growing up in New England, because I certainly did. And I remember when my family moved to Southern California, and I was in school, and I had to take an American history class. And, of course, I knew all the answers, and I was just stunned that all of these kids around me didn't have a clue about the early history of the United States and the Revolution and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And it was a real shock for me.
Well, we're just one generation away from losing our history. And there's a lot of folks, Mr. Mark Dice is one of the ones that come to mind. He's in Southern California, and he does these little questionnaires out on the beach. You know, who do we fight in World War II? And he's asking not just illiterate people, but people with college degrees. They don't have an idea. They have no clue. Of course, you would hope that people in Hawaii, when they look at Pearl Harbor, at least have a notion that we may have fought the Japanese in World War II. But a lot of folks don't even have that notion or that understanding. I want to touch on, you talked a little bit about the Big Pharma, and you talked about one of the projects we're involved in a minor way, is a documentary about a dear friend of mine, Dr. Punamatula Kishore, who created a model to treat addiction without using addictive medicines, without methadone or Suboxone. And he had a 60 to 70% success rate by 2011, 52 clinics in Massachusetts. Everybody was happy. He got the Heroes Among Us award by the Boston Celtics. A good old Bain Corporation was getting into the methadone business, and it's $1 billion business. And they offered him a very large amount of money to buy his clinics. They weren't looking at the furniture. They wanted the model. And he had no intention of selling. A year later, the big pharmacy, using the power of government, big government, in this case the state of Massachusetts, shut him down, and after a 4-year legal battle, put him in jail for about 8 or 9 months. And a documentary is being produced. In fact, the director of that documentary is in town in Boston doing some final shoots. It's called Hero in America. And it's not just about redeeming this man, but also exposing, I call it the medical mafia. So it's something that we're very concerned about.
Well, there's definitely room to be concerned about. We've talked about it a lot here, how Richard Nixon, when he signed the Home Health Maintenance Organization Act, basically turned medicine and medical care from a service that had safeguards against excessive profiteering into just another money-making operation. And since then, of course, prices have gone up. America has the most expensive medical care in the world, but it's ranked something like 33rd, 34th. There have been years.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Good night. I'll be back either tomorrow or Saturday.
Industrial complex.
See ya.